My name is Shandra, and my presentation is called A Party We'll Keep Promising, a Venezuelan family's story of displacement. And I want to give a special thank you to Professor Carrie Preston for being my advisor and being so helpful to me on this project. And I'd like to start out by explaining that I am a journalist, and the project that I undertook is also a journalistic project. And so, as you can read in the title, today we'll be hearing about a story, and I'm here today to tell you a story. But before I get into that story, I'd like to explain a little bit about why Venezuela and why displacement. Because the Venezuelan displacement crisis is the largest displacement crisis in Latin America's history. Nearly 8 million people have fled the country. It's about 1/4 of the entire population of Venezuela. And when we think about 8 million people, we can also think about this in terms of millions of families. And millions of families, and we take that even smaller. I wish as a journalist that I could tell you the story and the experiences of millions of families that are experiencing this unprecedented global diaspora and displacement crisis right now. But today, I'm here to just tell you one. And that is the story of the Hernandez family. So the Hernandez family has roots going back to Venezuela. And with a lot of the members of the family I talked with, they have these really beautiful, fond memories of holidays at grandma's house. And they have all of these recollections and these memories of long hours that kind of meld into days of drinking, dancing, laughing, and nowhere in this recollection, nowhere in their memory is ever this expectation that they themselves would become migrants. And the Hernandez family, the extended family, they're a predominantly middle-class family. As I mentioned, they have roots in Venezuela. But as you can see here, now where they're standing, the Hernandez family, the majority of them are not actually living in Venezuela anymore. The majority of them, after kind of starting from Venezuela, have now dispersed to various places all around the world. And what they watched is essentially the economic collapse of their family in parallel with the economic collapse of their country. And what does this have to do with Keystone? What does this have to do with my project? Why am I here telling you this story? And as a journalist, this project takes the form of a long-form magazine article, which is currently being pitched for publication. And it brings together elements of writing and photography to bring a very narrative message and to bring a very narrative story. And what do I mean by narrative? When I say narrative, I mean that me as a journalist, I'm not here to tell you the story of the Hernandez family. The Hernandez family is here to tell you and to show you their story. And in order to be able to do that, members of the Hernandez family generously opened up their time, their lives, their experiences, and their memories to me for the last 8 months to be able to tell this story together. And when we think about, like I said, we have millions of people, millions of families, one family, I wanted to bring it even closer, to really humanize this experience. And so I worked with 4 Hernandez women, all first and second cousins. And what you'll read in my piece is it's structured in the form of 4 vignettes. And these 4 vignettes will take elements of past and present, really weaving together their story of leaving the country of Venezuela and what their lives are like now. And this required a sense of very immersive reporting. And so, as I mentioned, the Hernandez women that I worked with, they were so generous with me in their time and also this very emotional remembrance of what it is to leave your home country, to leave your family, and to start an entire new life, essentially on your own. And so in this immersive reporting process, I traveled to the 4 different countries that I was working in, and I spent holidays, family gatherings, we went to work together, we walked to the streets, and we remembered together. And so the piece is structured in the form of 4 vignettes. And in these 4 vignettes, like I said, we'll be weaving in between past and present to start to tell this story through all of the senses. Since I was there as a journalist, you will also be put into this scene and you'll be smelling and hearing and tasting and seeing everything that the Hernandez women are experiencing, both past and present. And so now that I've explained to you so much about this project, I'd like to introduce you to the 4 women that I worked with. And the first woman is Rebecca. She lives in Framingham, Massachusetts. And so we'll start our journey, and we'll start the first vignette there, speaking with and understanding her story. And then we'll travel to Chile, and we'll meet with Gloria, who asked to change her name for privacy reasons. And after meeting Gloria, we'll head to Peru to meet with Maria Alejandra, and finally with Carla in the Dominican Republic. And throughout this piece and throughout these stories, we'll be taking in and we'll be reflecting on a lot of different themes of what it means for one family and essentially a divergence of this family that never expected themselves to migrate, and what it means for them economically, legally, in terms of their own personal sense of identity and family and hope of one day returning to country, returning to family, and balancing all of this, entering into a new country and staying connected to family. And so I'd like to leave you now with an unedited, unpublished excerpt from the piece that I hope you will read the full version when it's out, but their messages always circle back to one day. One day they'll meet in a country in between and rent a big house. Maybe it'll be yellow, or maybe it really would be grandma's house. They'll kick out the strangers, fill the room with the smell of arepas, the sounds of salsa and merengue. The adults will dance until dawn, while the kids doze on dinner chairs pushed against walls. Rebecca looks across the dance floor at her oldest holding her youngest. The 2 girls wear Venezuela's colors, the space around them alive with movement and the sense of home. Life continues, home or not, and Venezuelans still know how to throw a damn good party. She grins, downs another drink, and lets out a full-bellied laugh. We'll do this again together, she smiles, one day. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah.
Amazing job. I was just wondering, being so fully immersed in these families, what it's like for you to whether translate from Spanish to English or translate just their stories into a way that you felt like they were fully represented.
Yeah, I mean, all of my interviews that I did were in Spanish. And so this definitely was an interesting experience for me. As a non-native Spanish speaker, I do speak it fluently, but it was definitely this challenged me as a journalist a lot about the power of listening and the power of transcripts and asking other native speakers to really make sure that I was understanding the stories that they were telling me, because there was no, oh, sorry, I didn't understand that in Spanish, can we say it in English? This was a full immersion into the work that I'm beginning to do as a journalist now, speaking with only Spanish-speaking populations.
Hi, I'm wondering if you got a sense of, across these 4 women, if their families still interact with Venezuelan diaspora communities in these various countries, because I know, like, in Boston, we have, like, cultural centers where people will come and participate in, like, like dance and food and activities related to the diaspora community.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really depends, at least for the women's experience it's really about this sense of integration. There's this kind of push and pull between once you leave Venezuela and you're entering into a new home country, there's a lot of this pull. We'll read a lot in Maria Alejandra and Gloria's piece about not fully accepting that they're gone. You know, maybe their bodies are in a new country, but their hearts are still in Venezuela. And with that pull back to an old community, it becomes really hard to try and kind of allow for these roots to grow in new communities. So what we see with Rebecca is initially it was really hard for her to transition, and it was a very isolating event. For every woman, we'll hear kind of these stories of isolation, and then as every woman is kind of in different pieces and journeys of her path, the more that the acceptance of the integration into new country continues, then that's when we start to see kind of this building of community. So Rebecca, who's now been in the United States for about 20 years, she has grown this really vast, beautiful community. I got to actually go to one of their Christmas parties, hundreds and hundreds of Venezuelans. That was totally new for me, and it was a really beautiful experience to see so far from home that it is absolutely possible to make community, but it really depends on the acceptance of wanting to do that.
Great presentation. It's been awesome following you throughout this journey. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit on you as a journalist, balancing the emotional aspect of dealing with these families, these stories, that responsibility.
Yeah, this is the first time that I have fully immersed in a project like this. Like I said, it was 8 months of reporting, and there's a lot of lines within journalism, you know, the ethicality lines there, it's a gray area of what it means to be a journalist and what it means I found to be a human. And to really open up these conversations and speak with these families. This was the first time that I found myself reporting at parties, found myself reporting in their homes at dinners, and kind of figuring out this balance between, yes, I'm a journalist, when am I here taking notes, when am I putting that down and being a human and talking to you, and maybe stopping conversations when it gets too emotional for either of us. Because as we're recounting these stories, it's such a deeply emotional experience for a lot of these women who haven't had a lot of brain space maybe for this in their experience now living in a new place, in their new homes. And as a journalist, making sure that first and foremost in all of these experiences, we're putting humans before journalism. I'm not here to take your story, we're here to tell it together, and that was something that was kind of a through line throughout this whole piece for me.
Last question.
Hi, beautiful job, Shandra. I'm curious if you could speak more as to how you met the Hernandez women and how you kind of made these connections from, you know, maybe your first point of contact, you know, through this family. So, yeah.
Absolutely. As a journalist, it's all about finding your sources. So I was thinking about how am I going to find a family that I want to work with to tell this story. And initially I was thinking, okay, maybe I can go to resettlement agencies and kind of find my way in through that. And there are actually a lot of walls to doing that. So I went straight to the source itself, lovely social media, to Facebook. And I started putting out calls and just essentially saying, hey, I'm a journalist, I'm looking to do this project. And that's how I started beginning interviews with families and with people interested. And so I assumed that once I found my one family, once I started working with Rebecca, was the first person in Framingham, Massachusetts that I began working with, that's when our conversation opened up and she said, hey, look, I have a family member who's interested in working with you in Chile, in Peru, in the Dominican Republic, and that's kind of where our web began together.